In the late noughties, the most boring Armageddon occurred in the form of the recession, with people drowning in noughts and decimal points they couldn't possibly hope to make any sense of. And whilst us higher echelons were fine with proceedings, drinking, well, quite frankly, you can't pronounce what this is, and smoking our salted caramel cigars, apparently plebs like yourselves were having a bit of a hard time. I'm not here to brag. What I'm here to say is don't worry. There is absolutely no danger of such a crisis ever occurring ever again. Oh, first grade Waitrose brand gold encrusted triple clotted cream Luna fudge. Crisis casts 5 players as entrepreneurs in Axia, a once proud and illustrious nation that's now falling into economic turmoil. Circumstances have made it easier than ever to snap up companies at a cheap price, and it's an ideal time to monopolise on Axia's lost industries. However, they'll all be completely worthless if the players can't work together, because if they can't, the bank's going to go about as broke as my actual understanding of economic policy. And before we start, I should say that Crisis has not yet been released. This is a prototype and not representative of the final product. There are already several changes coming its way, most notably in the form of components. For instance, the resources will not mostly be cubes. The purples representing chemicals will be little beakers. The blacks representing machines will be awesome looking cogs. It's already been done with the food, i.e. in the bread, which is really cool. I mean, you can't make a sandwich out of it, but it looks really cool. So bear that in mind throughout this review. Don't judge this based on its appearance. In fact, if you're going to judge anything based on those parameters, feel free to just be more accepting of how things look. Anyways, I say that, but I'm just going to sneak this one in. The game itself already looks pretty great. Its diesel punk setting can be seen throughout every aspect of the game. And for a game called Crisis, each card just seems to fit into place with what's going on the board and has a way of fitting in just right. Well, I appreciate it. Gameplay in Crisis follows typical worker placement fare. You place one of your managers on a space on the board and you get something out of it, be it cash, resources, employees, or a huge company to run. The consequences to your actions are clear throughout the entire game. However, there are a couple of things that add significant weight to it. The first being the resources themselves piling up in front of you in different shapes, sizes and types that if you can't manage efficiently, they'll be completely wasted in regards to the limited turns that you have. And the second thing is this little bugger here. This traffic light stock exchange here represents Axia's current economic situation. Whether it's in the green, yellow or red affects certain aspects of the game, most noticeably what Crisis cards you're going to see. Crisis cards reveal events that are going to last the duration of the round and are always bad, although if we're going to colour code it, green cards are bad, yellow cards are worse and red cards are a whole lot of, oh boy, no thanks. Although to be fair, the worse off Axia is, the less you have to pay for foreign employees to come on and join your workforce. So yay, better priced labour. Whose side am I on? The economic state is dictated by how many points you have and just how well you're doing. See, each player starts with 15 victory points because they don't just represent success, but they're a currency within themselves, a measure of how much you're contributing to the economy to prevent a nationwide cash apocalypse. Each round has a victory point goal for each player to try and hit, a milestone that determines just how well Axia is coping with the crisis at hand. At the end of a round, players tally up their points in correlation to this target, and this in turn affects the financial status. Players over the target add to the economy by a number of points equal to how far they've overachieved, and the opposite can be said for those below it. Therefore, tallying up the net worth of an instance like this would leave the economy 3 points worse off. Thanks, guys. The state of the economy can have one overwhelmingly negative effect. If it ever hits zero, that's it. The country goes bankrupt. The game ends immediately, and only players above the target at that point in time have a chance of winning, if there are any at all. I really appreciate this mechanic, mainly because it fuels most of the player interaction throughout the entire game. But also, it adds another layer to it without overcomplicating its core. I played a fair few worker placement games recently that seem to overcomplicate the simple process of putting forth your blue-collar army on the board, and this in turn affects the pacing as you try and wrap your head around processes that really should be simpler than they actually are. But Crisis' unique selling point exists outside of its main mechanic and can be easily analysed alongside gameplay, and you might be sitting there thinking, oh Ben, it's obvious, just score as many points as you possibly can and fly off into the lead, it's simple stuff. But due to the amount of options available to players, it can be shockingly easy to fall from the reassuring wealth of green to the spirit-crushing pennilessness of being in the red. What? It's the future. This is what beans look like in the future, okay? Don't judge me on what I eat. I'm going to, it's a white one. I hate the white ones. Ugh. Oh, looky here. You can take out a loan and get an impressive 10 credits in monies. But you'll have to pay interest of 1 credit every round for each loan you take out, and you'll lose a victory point for increasing the trade deficit. Oh, look over here, actually. You can get impressive clumps of resources from imports. But importing stuff in doesn't exactly increase confidence in trade, and as such, each import costs money. And victory points. You can work on becoming self-sufficient, which is an ideal solution in this current climate, but it takes ages to set up your industries. So every choice is a gamble. Do you risk it, take a hit on points, head to the import section and get some rather exotic looking resources that would take you rounds to generate by yourself? Or do you stay put, work on building up your workforce while you remain stagnant on the victory point board as the target gets higher and higher and higher with each passing round, and the financial status takes an inevitable hit, but later on, strike with all the bread you can muster. Or machines, if you're better at business than I am. I think we need to head over to the whiteboard for a report on how to handle your economic status. Thanks, Ben. So here we have a graph showing the financial progression in a typical game of Crisis that we played. And it can get a lot steeper if you're doing particularly badly, but usually it ebbs and flows throughout the entire game. But what we can garner from this is the game is split up into 3 acts. The first, in the opening round, has you trying to invest into companies whilst not really giving that much to the economy as a whole, and therefore trying to keep your finances from hitting absolute nothingness. Of course, attempting to keep Axia afloat at the same time. Whereas in the second round, you're trying to capitalize on a workforce that can increase the efficiency of these companies and can recover the economy as a whole. There are 4 different kinds of employees: workers, farmers, engineers, bankers, and a few worker-farmer double-talented show-offs. Each company requires input in the form of employees and potentially resources in order to make it function, to get the rewards on the bottom right of the card. However, additional employees can help increase your rewards with these modifiers. For instance, these 3 victory points turn into 4 if you add a banker with a +1 modifier onto it. But if a resource reward has a multiplier on it, then the modifier is added to that. So in the same case, this is not 2 times 2, but 3 times 2, which equals 6 credits. Not 4, very good. Depending on the company, this could also get you food, chemicals, machines, any resource really, or you could just sacrifice your reputation and import those resources in. But you shouldn't do that because Axia is a proud nation that does not need help from others, and I'm not trying to add political subtext here of any kind. I just want to make you laugh. It's hard to make a perfect machine that's not reliant on any other factors on the board, but if you manage to utilise your workforce well, it means you'll probably be monopolising on, if not 1, 2 kinds of resource in the game's final round, which will have you all racing to export these as quickly as you can for a quick cash and points booster. Landing a manager in the southeast means you can either sell 4 of any kind of resource to the black market for big money, or select one of the 8 contracts on the left and sell up to the number displayed of that chosen resource for less money but precious points. If we were to ever hit bankruptcy, it'd pretty much be at the end of round 2. However, if not, this could even get higher and higher as we'd spend the entire game trying to build a machine only to push everything out in the game's final act. There was one game, however, that saw a dramatic alteration to this formula though. So this crater was caused by one of our first games. I actually think it's a really interesting piece of data when you compare it to social interaction in a game of Crisis. You see, in the opening round, the finances were plummeting until we hit this point here where we realised if we don't at least cooperate slightly on this, then there's going to be an early endgame and we're all going to lose. And it was intriguing because, well, when you compare it to standard worker placement games, you might take up a spot, not because you want the resources from it, but because you want to prevent somebody else from having them. Maybe oh, drat moment, I'll get you next time, but the only way you'll be able to get them is by taking that space next time. Here, however, you had weaker players negotiating with stronger players, saying that they needed to take the spots that other players wanted, and if they didn't, everyone would lose, and those stronger players would just have to contemplate game-ending doom, sit there and nod, and just let it happen. The thing is, detecting this potentially game-altering moment requires a fair bit of savvy and can't be taught by any rulebook. New players without a little bit of help might completely miss it and therefore may not seize an opportunity that's directly in front of them, or if they're just left way back on the victory points track, may find it really hard to catch up. And of course that means they're the sole reason why the financial foundations of Axie have fallen in on themselves and they should feel really guilty for what they've done. Players lacking confidence can head over to the northwest corners of Axie to throw a few managers in there in a bid to amass these influence cards that could potentially reverse fortunes positively for those who play them, and potentially negatively for those who don't. If you find that your group is constantly going bankrupt, then there is one saving grace. For any amount of players that you have, there are 3 difficulties, easy, medium and hard, that directly affect the target score you have to hit on each round. Therefore, if you play it on easy, that target's going to be lower and therefore an early endgame is less likely to happen. But if you can't get into the game's semi-cooperative way of thinking, if you can't manage your own resources whilst everything on the board is being recycled, the employees, the companies, the things that you can sell, it's going to be really hard for you to fall in love with Crisis because you're going to be the one all the way at the back, leading the entire country to bankruptcy every single time. And that's a shame because it takes time to see what makes Crisis so special. And really, I think that's the crux of the matter when it comes down to the question of should you get it. If you're the sort of person who buys a game, plays it a couple of times and then just leaves it on the shelf like some sort of weird art deco piece as soon as something new comes along, I can't really recommend Crisis to you. If you're looking for a worker placement game and you like your own personal objectives signposted to you, you like them to be quite clear and you don't want the social interaction to get a little too tense for your liking, you want it to get to the point where you're just simply taking up spaces that other opponents want and they all go, ooh, drat and ooh, blast and ooh, darn, I wanted that, then you're not going to want to delve into this and really see what makes Crisis tick. However, if you're looking for a worker placement game with some real grit to it, not just in the aesthetic, but in the gameplay itself, if you want a worker placement game that actually genuinely has some social tension to get to the point where it's quite dramatic, but at the same time, not completely cutthroat, Crisis is definitely the game for you, trust me. A huge investment in time is well worth the investment of your cash, much like my salted caramel cigar business that I'm opening next month. It started as a joke, but I don't want to sound desperate, but if you want to chuck money at it, feel free. I am being evicted next month. Probably shouldn't have spent loads of cash on suits or jelly beans.